Let me know where to send the custody papers. That was the text my husband sent me after he and his mother successfully kicked me out of my own house and called Child Protective Services. I was sitting in a cheap motel room, completely isolated from my two little boys, while my family told everyone I was having a mental breakdown. I was the sole provider working 60-hour weeks to support his failed businesses, only to be thrown away the second they manufactured a reason to take my children. He wanted me to sign away my rights quietly to avoid a public scandal. He had no idea I was already holding the one document that would guarantee he never slept in that house again. Before I show you how I dismantled their perfect suburban lie, let me know what time it is where you are right now. Let's start at the beginning. The funny thing about working in escrow is that you spend all day protecting strangers from being robbed, only to come home and sit across from a thief at your own dining table. My name is Sarah. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 4 years, I have been the sole financial pillar holding up a house built entirely on secrets. I just didn't know it yet. It was a Sunday evening in late October. The Charlotte air outside was already biting, but inside my kitchen, it was suffocating. I stood by the sink, still wearing my work blouse, washing the mud off my son's soccer cleats. Sam was 6. Toby was 4. They were upstairs watching a movie, blissfully unaware of the tension thickening in the dining room behind me. At the center of that room sat the mahogany table I had bought with my first major commission check. And sitting at the head of that table, a seat he hadn't paid a dime toward, was my husband, Mark. Mark was currently scrolling through his phone, ignoring his mother, Eleanor, who was busily rearranging the pot roast platter for the third time. Mark was what my grandmother used to call a man of endless beginnings. He was always one investor, away from a breakthrough, one app idea, away from becoming a millionaire. His latest venture was a customized logistics software for local landscaping companies. It had bled $42,000 out of our savings over the past 11 months. The server racks for it were still sitting unopened in our garage, gathering dust right next to my old Honda. "Sarah, sweetheart, come sit," Eleanor called out. Her voice was dipped in that specific brand of southern sweetness that always left a sticky residue. "The meat is getting cold, and the Lord knows you look like you need a hot meal." I dried my hands, took a breath, and walked into the dining room. Eleanor was wearing her Sunday pearls. She always wore them when she came over for family dinners after church. She was the head of the Women's Benevolence Committee at Grace Fellowship, a woman who baked pies for sick neighbors and prayed loudly for the less fortunate. She was also a woman who firmly believed a wife's place was anywhere but an office. I sat down opposite her. Mark didn't look up from his screen. "I saw Pastor Miller this morning," Eleanor said, spooning carrots onto Mark's plate first, then her own. She didn't offer the spoon to me. "He asked about you. I had to tell him you were working again. On the Lord's Day." "It's the end of the month, Eleanor," I said quietly, pouring myself a glass of water. "Closings pile up. People want the keys to their houses." Eleanor sighed. It was a practiced, heavy sigh, the kind designed to draw maximum attention to her own supposed distress. "I just worry, that's all. I worry about the boys. With you working these 12-hour days, they barely see their mother. A child needs a mother's presence, Sarah, not just her paycheck." There it was. The needle. She delivered it with a look of pure, manufactured maternal concern. Her eyebrows drew together. Her hand rested flat against her chest, right over the pearls. If anyone else had been in the room, they would have thought she was genuinely grieving my children's emotional well-being. I looked at Mark. He took a bite of roast, his eyes firmly glued to a YouTube video playing on silent. He wasn't going to defend me. He never did. In this house, keeping the peace meant letting Eleanor rewrite reality however she saw fit. Usually I swallowed it. I swallowed the exhaustion of reviewing 50-page title deeds, the stress of covering Mark's missed car payments, and the quiet humiliation of being judged by a woman who hadn't worked a paying job since 1988. But tonight the exhaustion was sitting right behind my eyes, heavy and throbbing. I looked at the table. My table. I looked at the food my grocery money had bought, cooked in an oven I was currently paying off at $150 a month. I picked up my fork, looked directly into Eleanor's perfectly mascaraed eyes, and kept my voice completely flat. I might be working late, Eleanor, but that paycheck is the only reason the bank hasn't foreclosed on this dining table. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy winter blanket. Eleanor froze her spoon, hovering halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened, the mask of sweet concern cracking for just a fraction of a second to reveal the cold, calculating fury underneath. No one spoke to her like that. Certainly not the daughter-in-law she viewed as nothing more than an ungrateful ATM. Mark finally looked up from his phone. His face flushed with immediate panic. "Jesus, Sarah," he muttered quickly, glancing at his mother to gauge the damage. "Don't do this now. She's just trying to help. Don't make a scene." "Don't make a scene." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or launch into a monologue about the overdue credit card bills hidden in my desk drawer. I had dropped my one stone into the pond, and I was done. "I have more files to review," I said. I stood up, leaving my plate completely untouched, and walked out of the room. I didn't wait to hear Eleanor's inevitable tearful whisper to Mark about how unstable I was becoming. I went straight to my home office, a converted walk-in closet off the master bedroom, and shut the door. The space was barely big enough for a desk, but it was mine. I sat down in the dark for a long moment, listening to the muffled sounds of Mark comforting his mother downstairs. I opened my laptop. The screen cast a harsh blue light over the stacks of color-coded folders surrounding me. I was an escrow officer. My entire career was built on verifying the truth. Finding the hidden liens, spotting the forged signatures, making sure everything balanced out to the exact penny. I just never thought to audit my own life. It was 11:47 p.m. when the notification arrived. I was halfway through a commercial property deed when my phone buzzed on the desk. It wasn't a text. It was an automated email alert. I clicked it open. The header bore the logo of Coastal Heritage Bank, the servicer for our mortgage. "Dear Sarah Bennett, we noticed an unsuccessful login attempt to your home equity portal from an unrecognized device at 11:45 p.m. If this was you, please ignore this message. If you did not attempt to sign in, please contact our fraud department immediately." I stared at the screen. My chest tightened. I hadn't tried to log into the mortgage portal. I hadn't touched that account in 3 years, not since we refinanced to get a lower rate. And Mark didn't even know the password. He hated dealing with the bank. I clicked the link to secure the account. Access denied. The screen read, "Password has been recently changed." A cold, electric dread spiked down my spine. The funny thing about real estate is that the paper never lies. But tonight, in the quiet of my own house, the paper was trying to tell me a story I wasn't ready to hear. I pulled into my driveway at 6:15 p.m. on Tuesday. The sun was already setting, casting long, sharp shadows across the lawn. I was exhausted. I had spent 8 hours untangling a nightmare of a commercial title transfer, and all I wanted was to heat up some leftovers and sit on the floor with my boys. But as I put the Honda in park, my foot hovered over the brake. There were 3 extra cars parked in front of my house. I recognized Aunt Carol's silver SUV. Behind it was Pastor Miller's beige LeSabre, and parked at a slight angle taking up the center of the driveway was Eleanor's white Lexus. My stomach dropped. An unannounced family gathering on a Tuesday evening was never a celebration. I unlocked the front door. The house was completely silent. No TV playing in the background. No sound of Sam and Toby fighting over Legos. I walked into the living room, and my lungs forgot how to pull in air. They had rearranged my furniture. The sofa and the armchairs were pulled into a tight, deliberate circle. Sitting in that circle were Aunt Carol, Pastor Miller, Eleanor, and my husband, Mark. In the center of the circle was my navy blue hard-shell suitcase. It was fully zipped. "Where are the boys?" was the first thing out of my mouth. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. Eleanor stood up. She was holding a crumpled tissue in her left hand, dabbing at eyes that were entirely dry. "They are safe, Sarah. They're at my sister's house playing with their cousins." "Why are my children at your sister's house on a school night?" I asked, looking at Mark. Mark didn't look at me. He was staring intensely at the corner of the area rug, his arms crossed tightly over his chest like a barricade. Pastor Miller stood up next. He gave me a look so saturated with pity I felt sick to my stomach. "Sarah, please. Sit down. We are here because we care about you." An intervention. I had seen them on television. I knew the format. But standing in my own living room looking at a suitcase I hadn't packed, the reality of it felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. "I don't need to sit," I said slowly. "I need someone to tell me why my luggage is in the middle of the floor." Eleanor let out a sharp, trembling breath. It was a masterclass in performance. She reached behind the armchair and lifted a canvas tote bag, the one I used for groceries. She placed it on the coffee table. The unmistakable sound of glass clinking against glass echoed in the quiet room. "I found these," Eleanor whispered. Her voice cracked perfectly. "In the bottom of your recycling bin, underneath the boys' juice boxes." She reached into the bag and pulled out 3 empty Smirnoff vodka bottles, half-gallon size. I stared at the clear glass. I hadn't touched vodka since my sophomore year of college. We didn't even keep hard liquor in the house. "Sarah," Pastor Miller said softly, "Eleanor came to me yesterday. She was weeping. She told me about the stress you've been under, the long hours at work, the erratic behavior at Sunday dinner. And now, this." He gestured to the bottles. "We know you're drowning. You can't carry this burden alone anymore." I looked at Aunt Carol. She was shaking her head, her lips pressed into a tight, disappointed line. I looked at Eleanor, who was now crying, openly burying her face in her hands. Then I looked at my husband, the man I had supported for 4 years, the man whose massive debts I was quietly paying off. "Mark," I said. It was a command. "Tell them. Tell them I don't drink. Tell them I work 60 hours a week to keep the electricity on. Tell them you were the one who put those bottles in the trash, or you watched your mother do it. Tell them the truth." Mark shifted his weight. He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't guilt. It was annoyance. "Don't make a scene, Sarah," he muttered, his voice dropping low, aimed only at me. "Just take the bag and go. It's embarrassing enough already." He gestured to the suitcase. "I've booked you a room at the extended stay down by the highway." Eleanor sniffled, recovering her voice. "Just for a few weeks, until we can get you into a proper facility. We're doing this because we love you, sweetheart. You need professional help, and we need to protect the children." Protect the children. From me. The trap sprang shut, its steel jaws locking around me with a deafening snap. If I screamed, if I grabbed those fake bottles and threw them against the wall, I was the unhinged alcoholic they claimed I was. If I cried and begged Mark to defend me, I was the emotionally unstable mother Pastor Miller had been warned about. They hadn't just ambushed me. They had cornered me in a room full of witnesses who were primed to interpret any reaction as a symptom of my sickness. They wanted a meltdown. Eleanor was waiting for it. I could see the anticipation humming beneath her fake tears. I didn't give it to her. The training of an escrow officer kicks in when everything goes wrong. When the numbers don't match, you don't panic. You step back, you secure the file, and you look for the fraud. I didn't say a word. I walked to the center of the circle. The silence in the room was so absolute I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I reached down and wrapped my hand around the handle of my suitcase. It was heavy. They had actually packed my clothes. "Sarah," Pastor Miller asked, confused by my silence. I didn't look at him. I looked directly at Eleanor. Her crying had stopped. For one brief, terrifying second, our eyes locked and the mask slipped. She wasn't a grieving mother. She was a predator who had just successfully cleared a competitor from her territory. I turned my back on all of them. I pulled the suitcase over the threshold, the wheels rumbling loudly against the hardwood floor. I walked out the front door and shut it quietly behind me. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on the edge of a faded floral bedspread in room 214 of a Motel 6. The air conditioner rattled in the window. The room smelled of old smoke and bleach. I hadn't cried. I couldn't. The shock was still sitting in my chest like a block of ice. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had orchestrated an eviction using God family and fake evidence. But why the rush? Why the extreme theater? Why today I reached into my laptop bag? If they wanted me out of the house this badly, it wasn't because of alcohol. It was because of paper. And paper was the one thing I understood better than anyone. I flipped the laptop open. The screen glowed in the dim room. It was time to go to work. The silence in room 214 was the loudest thing I had ever heard. There were no footsteps pounding down the hallway, no arguments over whose turn it was to pick the bedtime story. Just the hum of the mini fridge and the distant rhythmic rush of cars on the interstate. I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled my phone from my pocket. It was 8:15 p.m. Sam and Toby would be getting ready for bed right now, probably at Aunt Carol's house. My thumb hovered over Mark's contact name. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when the line clicked open. "Sarah," Mark whispered. His voice was hushed like he was hiding in a bathroom. "Put Sam on the phone," I said. My voice was completely steady. "I can't do that. You know I can't do that." He sounded irritated now. "You need to rest. Mom said the facility will have someone reach out to you tomorrow to, Mark, let me say goodnight to my children." "Stop making this harder than it has to be," he snapped. "You're not well. Do not call again tonight." Click. I lowered the phone to my lap. A single hot tear spilled over my lower lash line and tracked down my cheek. I let it fall. I let myself feel the absolute crushing gravity of a mother separated from her children by a wall of manufactured lies. I gave myself exactly 60 seconds to grieve in the sterile glow of the motel bedside lamp. Then I wiped my face with the back of my hand. Tears wouldn't get my boys back. Paper would. I unzipped the front pocket of my laptop bag and pulled out my work computer. I didn't care about the empty vodka bottles. I didn't care about Pastor Miller's pity. Those were just props in Eleanor's stage play. I needed to find the script. Why tonight? Why the rushed, hyper-dramatic intervention? You don't execute a maneuver like that unless you are running out of time and desperately need a scapegoat. I thought about the automated email alert from Coastal Heritage Bank the night before. Unrecognized login attempt. I opened a web browser and bypassed the bank entirely. If you want to know what's happening with a piece of real estate in North Carolina, you don't ask the lender. You ask the county. I typed in the URL for the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds public access portal. This was my daily playground. I knew the search interface better than I knew the back of my own hand. I entered our property address and my last name. I hit search. The screen populated with a list of recorded instruments. There was the original warranty deed from when we bought the house 6 years ago. There was the refinance deed of trust from 3 years ago. And right at the very top of the list, glowing in stark black text, was a new document, Instrument Type Deed of Trust, recorded 14 days ago. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't signed any mortgage documents 14 days ago. I clicked the link to view the image. The PDF loaded line by agonizing line on the motel's terrible Wi-Fi. Lender Coastal Heritage Bank. Borrower Mark Bennett and Sarah Bennett. Principal amount $150,000. It was a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. Someone had borrowed $150,000 against the equity of my house. The equity I had built by paying the mortgage entirely out of my own salary while Mark played entrepreneur in the garage. My fingers were ice cold on the trackpad. I scrolled past the terms, past the legal property description, straight down to page 14, the signature page. There it was. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett. I stared at the blue ink on the scanned page. To a bank teller, it probably looked fine. To Pastor Miller, it would look perfectly normal. But I am an escrow officer. I look at signatures for a living. The loops on the S were entirely wrong, too perfectly round, lacking the quick, natural flick I always made at the top. The slant of the B was hesitant. It was what experts called a tremor of forgery. The tiny, microscopic stutters a pen makes when someone is slowly drawing a signature instead of naturally writing it. I scrolled down a few more inches. The notary stamp belonged to a man named Arthur Vance. I had never met an Arthur Vance in my life. I sat back against the cheap headboard. The puzzle pieces didn't just snap together. They locked with the heavy metallic thud of a vault door. Mark hadn't just drained our savings. He had stolen the house right out from under me. And Eleanor knew. She had to. 14 days ago. The loan had funded. The money was gone. And the first billing statement from Coastal Heritage Bank would be arriving in the mail any day now. When I opened that envelope, I would have asked questions. I would have demanded an audit. I would have called the police. Unless, of course, I wasn't there to open the mail. Unless I had been forcefully removed from the home, discredited in front of the entire family, and branded as an unstable, hallucinating alcoholic. If I went to the police now shouting about a forged mortgage, Eleanor would simply shake her head, show them the vodka bottles, and whisper to the officers about my tragic descent into paranoia. It was brilliant. It was absolutely terrifyingly brilliant. They thought they had trapped me in a box where the truth sounded like madness. They forgot who they were dealing with. I reached for my phone again. I didn't call the police. The police wouldn't believe a supposedly drunken mother without ironclad proof. I needed someone whose entire career was built on dismantling lies. I scrolled through my professional contacts past the title reps and the real estate agents until I found the number I needed. It rang twice. Marcus and Associates. A deep voice answered. David. I said, my voice sharp and clear in the quiet room. It's Sarah Bennett from Carolina Title and Escrow. I need a favor. I need a forensic document examiner, and I need them tomorrow morning. David Marcus operated his forensic document examination business out of a nondescript office park near the airport. He was a retired state investigator, a man who spoke entirely in facts, and charged $400 an hour. It was 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday. I sat across from his wide, uncluttered desk holding a cup of terrible waiting room coffee. Between us lay two pieces of paper. One was a printed copy of the home equity line of credit from the county portal. The other was my actual driver's license. David adjusted a lighted magnifying loupe over the printed deed. He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He didn't ask why my eyes were bloodshot or why I was wearing the same blouse I had worn yesterday. In David's world, drama was irrelevant. Ink was everything. For 3 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the heavy hum of the fluorescent lights. Finally, David pushed the loupe aside and sat back in his leather chair. He picked up a red pen and tapped the end of it against the printed deed. "It's not even a good one, Sarah," he said, his voice completely flat. I set my coffee down. "You're sure?" "I don't deal in pretty sure." David turned the paper around so it faced me. He used the tip of the red pen to trace the blue ink of my supposed signature. "Look here. At the crest of the S and the bottom loop of the B, See how the ink pools slightly? That's hesitation. Someone was drawing your name, not writing it. They laid a piece of paper with your actual signature over this document, held it up to a light source, and slowly traced it. He looked up at me, his expression grave. They didn't even try to make it look natural, he said. This is a traced forgery. It's a felony, plain and simple. A knot in my chest that had been pulled tight for 12 hours finally loosened. It wasn't joy. It was ammunition. I need an affidavit, I told him. Certified and notarized. I need you to put exactly what you just told me on your official letterhead. You'll have it by noon, David said, pulling a fresh notepad toward him. Are you going to the police? Eventually, I said, standing up. But the police move slowly. I need to move fast. I walked out of his office and back into the bright morning sun. The air felt lighter. I still didn't have my children, and I was still effectively homeless, but I had the first piece of the sledgehammer I was going to use to shatter Eleanor's world. I unlocked my Honda, climbed into the driver's seat, and turned the key. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text message from a number I barely recognized. I opened it. The contact name loaded: Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable was the 70-year-old widow who lived directly across the street from us. She was the neighborhood watch captain in a subdivision that didn't actually have a neighborhood watch. She spent most of her days tending her hydrangeas and noticing things. Sarah, dear, the text read, I saw the commotion at your house yesterday evening. I don't want to pry into family business, but I thought you should see this. From Monday night. Beneath the text was a video file attachment. My pulse jumped. I tapped the video. It was a clip from Mrs. Gable's Ring doorbell camera. The footage was in that stark infrared black and white that makes everything look a little ghostly. The timestamp in the top right corner read, Monday, 11:34 p.m. The camera pointed directly at my driveway. On the screen, a white Lexus rolled quietly to a stop by the curb. The headlights clicked off. The driver's side door opened and Eleanor stepped out. Even in grainy night vision, I could recognize the stiff, upright way she held her shoulders. She didn't walk toward the front door. She walked to the trunk of the Lexus, popped it open, and pulled out a dark canvas tote bag. I held my breath, watching the tiny screen. Eleanor walked down the side of my driveway, heading straight for the Greene County recycling bins we kept by the garage. She lifted the lid. She reached into the tote bag. Even without audio, my brain filled in the exact sound, the heavy clinking of glass bottles being carefully dropped into the bin. 1, 2, 3. Eleanor closed the lid, smoothed down her sweater, and walked back to her car with the empty tote bag. The brake lights flared red in the dark, and the Lexus pulled away. I sat back against the headrest, staring at the frozen final frame of the video. The audacity of it was staggering. She had driven to my house in the dead of night, planted the empty vodka bottles in my trash, and then stood in my living room 18 hours later crying real tears while pretending to discover them. I saved the video to my phone. I emailed a copy to my hidden work drive, and then I backed it up to a cloud folder. I was a document keeper. I had the forgery. I had the setup. I could prove Eleanor and Mark were liars and criminals. But as I sat there in the sweltering heat of the car, a cold question crept into my mind. Mark had forged my name to steal $150,000. He had risked federal prison. But Mark didn't have the discipline to execute a scheme like this just to put the money in a savings account. He needed it for something specific, something urgent. I opened my laptop, resting it against the steering wheel, and logged into our joint checking account. I couldn't see the HELOC directly, but I could see where Mark transferred his money. I needed to follow the cash. Because whatever was waiting at the end of that paper trail was going to be the final nail in his coffin. I didn't go back to the motel immediately. I drove to a Panera Bread a few miles down the highway, ordered a black iced coffee. I had no intention of drinking and opened my laptop in a quiet corner booth. David's forensic affidavit was safely tucked inside my bag. I had the weapon. Now I needed to know exactly what I was aiming at. I logged into our joint checking account. The interface loaded, displaying a bleak balance of $412. There was no sign of a $150,000 deposit. But Mark wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a lazy man who relied on the infrastructure I had built for him. 3 years ago, when he launched his first failed startup, I had set up his business LLC accounts, acting as the registered agent to save us the filing fees. My credentials were still tied to the master login. I switched portals. I typed in the username for Bennett Logistics LLC and hit enter. The dashboard materialized. The current balance was $8,400. I clicked on the transaction history, setting the filter to the exact date the forged home equity loan had funded 14 days ago. The screen refreshed. There it was. An incoming wire transfer from Coastal Heritage Bank, $150,000. My eyes dragged down the screen, tracing where the money went next. I expected to see payments to software developers, server hosting fees, or maybe outstanding business debts. Instead, I saw a masterclass in betrayal. Outgoing wire Uptown Metro leasing, $42,000. Memo 12-month prepaid lease unit 412. Uptown Metro was a luxury high-rise complex in the center of the city, complete with a rooftop pool and a concierge. Mark's office was a spare bedroom in our house. He had no business leasing a luxury apartment. I kept scrolling. The charges became smaller, faster, and infinitely more agonizing. Charge West Elm Furniture, $8,450.20. Charge Peloton Interactive, $2,100. Charge Zales Jewelers, $1,245. Venmo transfer. Happy birthday, Ash, $500. Venmo transfer. Groceries for Ash, $300. I stared at the screen until the letters started to blur. He didn't steal my house to save his failing business. He stole it to fund a second life. While I was working 60-hour weeks calculating escrow shortages and scrubbing mud off our children's cleats, my husband was buying modern furniture for a 20-something named Ash in a luxury apartment overlooking the skyline. I didn't cry. The capacity for tears had been entirely burned out of me, replaced by a cold, humming current of pure adrenaline. The betrayal wasn't just painful, it was insulting. I had spent 4 years believing I was holding up a struggling entrepreneur, only to find out I was bankrolling a parasite. I took a screenshot of the entire ledger. Then I generated a PDF statement and emailed it to my secure drive. My phone vibrated violently against the laminate table. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown local number. I took a steadying breath and answered. Hello. Is this Sarah Bennett? The voice on the other end was female, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. Speaking. Ms. Bennett, my name is Valerie Higgins. I am an investigator with the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services Child Protective Division. I'm calling regarding an emergency report filed concerning your 2 children, Samuel and Tobias. The ambient noise of the Panera Bread, the clinking of ceramic mugs, the hiss of the espresso machine vanished. The world narrowed to the exact dimensions of the phone pressed against my ear. Child Protective Services. I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. What report? We received an anonymous call late last night. Ms. Higgins said, her tone indicating she was reading directly from a file. The caller stated that you have been suffering from severe mental instability and substance abuse. They reported finding multiple empty liquor bottles hidden in the children's play areas and recycling bins. The vodka bottles. Eleanor hadn't just used them to justify kicking me out. She had used them to lay the groundwork for illegal kidnapping. The caller, Ms. Higgins, continued, her voice clinical, expressed immediate concern for the boys' safety, stating, and I quote, I'm just a terrified grandmother. My daughter-in-law is completely unhinged. The audacity of the quote hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. A terrified grandmother. Eleanor was weaponizing the state of North Carolina to take my children, hiding behind a veil of manufactured Christian concern. Panic, hot and primal, clawed at the back of my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell this caseworker that my mother-in-law was a sociopath, that my husband was a thief, funding his mistress with a forged mortgage, and that the whole thing was a setup. But I knew the system. If I sounded frantic, if I raised my voice, I would become exactly what Eleanor claimed. I was an unhinged, unstable woman. I closed my eyes, digging my fingernails into my own thigh under the table until the pain centered me. "Ms. Higgins," I said. My voice was eerily calm, cold even. "I understand you have a protocol to follow. I am a licensed escrow officer. I have no history of substance abuse, no criminal record, and I can pass a drug or alcohol screening within the next 10 minutes if you require it." There was a slight pause on the line. She clearly hadn't expected this level of composure. "That may be requested later, Miss Bennett," she said, her tone softening just a fraction. "Right now, the children are temporarily in the care of their father and paternal grandmother at the primary residence. Given the nature of the report, I need to formally request that you do not attempt to remove the children from the home while the preliminary investigation is open." "I haven't attempted to remove them," I said, looking down at the screenshot of Mark's jewelry purchase for his mistress. "I am staying at a separate location." "That is advisable. An investigator will be in touch to schedule a formal interview with you. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Bennett." "Ms. Higgins?" I asked before she could hang up. "Yes. When this investigation is over, what is the penalty for filing a deliberately false CPS report?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Filing a false report is a Class 2 misdemeanor, ma'am. But right now, my only concern is the welfare of the children." "Understood," I said. "Have a good day." I ended the call and set the phone down. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from a rage so profound it felt like it was altering my DNA. They weren't just trying to humiliate me, they were trying to erase me. Eleanor wanted the perfect unbroken family image for her church group, and Mark wanted his house. And his 24-year-old girlfriend without paying alimony or child support. The only way they got everything was if I was declared legally unfit. The screen of my phone lit up again. This time, it was a text message. From Mark. "Sarah CPS called. Mom had to answer their questions. This is getting out of hand. For the sake of the boys, just sign a temporary custody agreement so we don't have to drag this through family court. We can keep it quiet. Let me know where to send the papers." I read the message 3 times. Let me know where to send the papers. He thought he had won. He thought the heavy machinery of the state and the fear of a public scandal would crush me into compliance. He thought I was just the quiet woman who paid the bills and washed the cleats. I picked up my phone and typed a single-letter reply. K. Let them think I was surrendering. Let them think I was a broken, terrified woman. Because an ambush only works when the target doesn't know you're holding a grenade. If you want to trap a predator, you have to play dead. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot of a Staples staring at my phone. I had sent Mark the single-letter text yesterday, but a text wasn't enough. He needed to hear the defeat in my voice. He needed to believe the intervention and the CPS threat had broken me. I hid his name in my contacts and put the phone to my ear. "Sarah," he answered on the second ring. His voice was brisk, busy, important. The voice of a man sitting in an apartment he paid for with stolen money. "Mark?" I said. I dropped my chin toward my chest, forcing my vocal cords to compress so my voice sounded thin and wavering. "I got your text. About the papers." "I told you this was the best way," he said smoothly. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded benevolent. It made my skin crawl. "Mom is just trying to protect the boys. You need to focus on getting healthy. I'll have my lawyer draft a temporary physical custody agreement. Nothing permanent, just until you're stable." Stable. They were going to milk that word until it bled. Okay, I whispered. I let out a shaky breath directly into the receiver. Just don't let CPS take them away, Mark. Please. I'm handling it, he said, swelling with unearned authority. I'll email you the PDF by Friday. You just need to print it, sign it in front of a notary, and we won't have to go to court. Okay, bye, Mark. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I sat up perfectly straight, rolled my shoulders back, and walked into Staples. 45 minutes later, I was back in the motel room with a portable laser printer, a ream of heavy stock paper, a box of plastic sheet protectors, and a 2-inch blue binder with color-coded index tabs. This was my territory. This was what I did for a living. I organized chaos into legally binding reality. I spent the next 3 hours printing. Every page was placed meticulously into a plastic sleeve. Tab A was red. The fraud. It contained the printed HELOC deed highlighted at the signature line. Behind it sat David Marcus's notarized forensic affidavit declaring the signature a traced forgery. Tab B was yellow. The motive. It held the screenshots of the Bennett Logistics LLC bank account, the wire transfer, the $42,000 12-month lease at Uptown Metro, the Venmo payments to Ashley, the jewelry receipts. Tab C was green. The setup. This section held the CPS investigator's business card with my handwritten notes from the phone call, quoting Eleanor's anonymous report. Tucked into the pocket folder next to it was a sleek metal USB drive containing the Ring camera footage of Eleanor planting the vodka bottles. When I closed the binder, it was thick, heavy, and completely lethal. At 2 p.m., I walked into the lobby of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's headquarters. I didn't go to the front desk to talk to a patrol officer. I had called ahead and used my professional title to bypass the intake queue. Detective Reynolds from the Economic Crimes Division met me in a glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor. He was a man in his late 50s, with tired eyes and a tie that looked like it had been knotted at 5 a.m. He sat down, flipped open a notepad, and looked at me. "You said you have a verified real estate fraud case, Ms. Bennett. Usually those go through the lender first." "The lender doesn't know yet," I said. I slid the blue binder across the table. "Because the perpetrator is my husband." Detective Reynolds raised an eyebrow, but he didn't interrupt. He opened the binder to the red tab. I sat in absolute silence for 20 minutes while he read. I watched his eyes scan the forensic affidavit. I watched him flip to the yellow tab and trace the wire transfer to the luxury apartment lease. Finally, I pointed to the green tab and handed him the USB drive. My mother-in-law used the forged funds to stage an intervention. I explained, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. She then called Child Protective Services, claiming I was an alcoholic to secure emergency custody of my children before the bank statements arrived in the mail. Detective Reynolds leaned back in his chair. He looked at the binder, then looked up at me. The tired look in his eyes had been replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "This isn't just a domestic dispute, Ms. Bennett," he said quietly. "A forged HELOC across state banking lines is wire fraud. It's a federal felony. If what your expert says holds up, your husband is looking at serious prison time." "I am aware of the statutes, Detective." "And the mother-in-law?" he asked, tapping the USB drive. "Filing a false CPS report is a misdemeanor, but if we can prove she conspired to facilitate the wire fraud or the forgery—" "She drove the getaway car," I said flatly. "I just need to know how long it takes to get an arrest warrant." "With a package this clean?" Reynolds closed the binder and pulled it toward his side of the desk. "I'll run this past the ADA this afternoon. I can likely have warrants signed by a judge by Friday morning. But executing them, sometimes it's hard to track people down on a weekend." "You won't have to track her down," I said. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Earlier that morning, my sister-in-law had texted me a screenshot of Eleanor's latest Facebook post, mostly just to twist the knife. I slid the phone across the table to the detective. The post was a picture of Eleanor standing in front of the stained glass windows of Grace Fellowship Church, smiling humbly. The caption read, "God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers." It has been a heartbreaking week for our family as we deal with a private tragedy, but the Lord's light shines through the darkness. I am so humbled to announce I will be receiving the Women of Benevolence Award this Sunday at the 10 a.m. service. Please pray for my grandchildren during this difficult transition. Detective Reynolds read the post. He didn't smile, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He slid the phone back to me. Sunday at 10 a.m., Reynolds said, writing it down on his legal pad. Is there a specific entrance she uses? She always sits in the front row, I said, right by the center aisle, so everyone can see her. All right, Ms. Bennett, I will be in touch on Friday. I walked out of the police station and into the warm afternoon air. Mark thought he was getting a signed custody agreement by Friday. He was getting a grand jury indictment instead. I got into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and let out a long, slow exhale. Sunday was coming. There is a specific kind of knock that law enforcement uses. It's not a polite tap, and it's not a frantic pounding. It is 3 heavy, evenly spaced strikes of knuckles against wood. It's a sound designed to command compliance. It came at 7:15 a.m. on Friday morning. I was sitting fully dressed on the edge of the motel bed waiting for a call from Detective Reynolds. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my slacks, and opened the door. A Mecklenburg County Sheriff's deputy stood on the exterior walkway. He had a thick manila envelope clipped to a heavy-duty clipboard. His hand rested casually near his duty belt. "Sarah Bennett?" he asked. His tone was aggressively neutral. "Yes." He unclipped the envelope and held it out to me. "You've been served by order of the family court. Have a safe day, ma'am." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back toward his cruiser, the heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel parking lot. I closed the door, my hands suddenly slick with cold sweat. I knew what legal service looked like. I processed liens and court orders every single day. But knowing the mechanics of the guillotine doesn't make it any less terrifying when your own neck is on the block. I tore the flap of the envelope open. Ex parte temporary custody and restraining order. The words were printed in bold black letters across the top of the official court form. In the bottom right corner, glowing like a fresh burn, was the red ink stamp of a district court judge. I read the summary of the complaint. Plaintiff Mark Bennett, affiant Eleanor Bennett. My eyes scanned the bulleted list of allegations. They hadn't just used the vodka bottles. Eleanor had sworn a legal affidavit under penalty of perjury. She claimed I had been exhibiting violent mood swings. She cited the open CPS investigation as proof of an immediate and ongoing threat to the physical safety of the minor children. Because the CPS investigation was technically active, the judge had rubber-stamped the emergency order without even holding a hearing. That's what ex parte meant. One-sided. They had walked into a courthouse, told a judge I was a dangerous, drug-addicted mother, and the state had handed them a weapon. I flipped to the restrictions page. The defendant, Sarah Bennett, is hereby enjoined and restrained from coming within 500 feet of the marital residence. The defendant is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Oak Creek Elementary School. Temporary sole legal and physical custody is granted to the plaintiff, Mark Bennett. All visitation is suspended, pending a full hearing. Suspended. The piece of paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the cheap motel carpet. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I sank to my knees, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. A low, jagged sound tore its way out of my throat. It wasn't a cry. It was the sound an animal makes when a steel trap shatters its leg. I was legally barred from my own children. If I drove to their school right now just to see them at recess, I would be arrested. If I pulled into my own driveway, I would be put in handcuffs. Mark and Eleanor had successfully weaponized the entire judicial system against me. My phone on the nightstand vibrated. Then it chimed. Then it vibrated again. I crawled over and grabbed it. The screen was flooded with notifications. Aunt Carol, I just heard about the court order. I am praying for your soul, Sarah. Please get help. Cousin Bethany Mark told us everything. How could you do this to your boys, Pastor Miller? The church has resources for addiction. Don't let pride keep you in the dark. Eleanor had gone on a PR tour. She had sent the court order to the family group chats. In their eyes, the judge's signature was absolute proof of my guilt. I was completely, utterly isolated. The scapegoat had been successfully sacrificed to preserve the golden child. The phone vibrated in my palm, switching from a text notification to an incoming call. Mark. I stared at his name. He was calling to check his work. He wanted to hear the devastation in my voice. He wanted the final, crushing surrender. I took a deep, shuddering breath, locking the maternal terror down into a tight, dark box in the back of my mind. I swiped right. Did you get it? Mark asked immediately. No greeting, just the clinical check of a man confirming a transaction. I got it. I said, my voice dead. Sarah, I didn't want to do this, he said, instantly sliding into the victim role. It was sickeningly predictable. But you wouldn't just sign the paperwork. Mom was terrified you were going to show up at the house and cause a scene in front of the boys. CPS practically advised us to get the order. CPS practically advised us. Another lie, to shift the blame. You swore under oath that I was a danger to my own sons, Mark. I said softly. I had to protect the boys. He snapped, his voice rising defensively. Look, this doesn't have to be permanent. My lawyer is drafting the final custody surrender today. If you sign it, we can arrange supervised visits. Maybe a few hours on alternating weekends. But you have to cooperate. He was dangling my children in front of me like a carrot. Sign over my rights, keep my mouth shut about the house, and he would graciously allow me to see my sons under the watchful, judgmental eyes of his mother. I looked down at the court order on the floor. I looked at the red stamp. Then I looked at my briefcase, where the blue binder full of federal evidence was no longer sitting because it was currently locked in an evidence room at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. You can take my keys, Mark, I said. My voice dropped an octave, losing every ounce of the artificial weakness I had been projecting. It was cold. It was absolute. But nobody takes my children. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I blocked his number. I immediately opened my dial pad and punched in a number I had memorized yesterday. Economic crimes, Detective Reynolds. A gruff voice answered. Detective, it's Sarah Bennett. Ms. Bennett, Reynolds said. The background noise of the police precinct faded slightly as he seemingly closed a door. I was just about to call you. The ADA reviewed your binder. And she hasn't seen a paper trail that clean in 5 years, Reynolds said. The forensic affidavit on the HELOC forgery sealed it. The grand jury convened for an emergency session this morning. They handed down the indictment. My heart hammered against my ribs hard and fast. Do you have the warrants? 2 arrest warrants, Reynolds confirmed. 1 for Mark Bennett, 1 for Eleanor Bennett. Felony forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge signed them 20 minutes ago. Mark just served me with an ex parte restraining order, I told him, staring at the wall. Based on Eleanor's false CPS report, they took my kids, detective. There was a heavy silence on the line. Cops know exactly how dirty family court can get, and Reynolds was a veteran. An ex parte order is civil, Miss Bennett, Reynolds said quietly. A federal felony indictment supersedes it. When they are in handcuffs, that custody order becomes unenforceable. Where are the children right now? At school, I said. Eleanor picks them up on Fridays, but she doesn't get them until 3. Good. They won't be present for this. Reynolds paused. You said the mother-in-law is receiving a church award on Sunday morning at 10. Yes. Does she drive the husband, or do they take separate cars? She always drives Mark, I said. She likes to arrive as a family. All right. Reynolds said, his voice tightening with professional resolve. We could pick them up at the house tonight, but with the suspect profile, a public setting reduces the chance of them barricading or attempting to destroy digital evidence in the home. Sunday morning. Grace Fellowship Church. I'll be there, I said. Ms. Bennett, you don't have to be. It might get ugly. I know exactly how ugly it gets, Detective, I replied. I'll see you on Sunday. I ended the call. I picked the restraining order up off the floor, walked over to the motel trash can, and dropped it in. Let Eleanor have her Friday victory. She had exactly 48 hours left as a free woman. Grace Fellowship Church was a sprawling modern sanctuary with vaulted ceilings and massive stained glass windows that threw fractured, colorful light across the pews. It was a place designed to make you feel small in the presence of something greater. For Eleanor Bennett, it was a stage. I stood in the heavy oak doorway at the back of the sanctuary. It was 10:15 a.m. The service was in full swing. The pews were packed with nearly 400 members of the congregation. Beside me stood Detective Reynolds and his partner, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Vance. Both wore dark suits. Both carried a quiet, undeniable gravity that had absolutely nothing to do with religion. At the front of the room, Pastor Miller was standing behind the clear acrylic podium. His voice echoed warmly through the sound system. The Women of Benevolence Award is not given lightly, Pastor Miller was saying, smiling down at the front row. It requires a spirit of unwavering sacrifice. It requires a woman who puts her family, her community, and her faith above all else. Eleanor, would you please come up? The congregation erupted into polite, warm applause. Eleanor stood up from the front pew. She was wearing a tailored navy blue suit and her signature pearls. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had successfully cleared every obstacle from her path. She turned, gave a humble, tear-eyed smile to the crowd, and began to walk up the 3 carpeted steps to the altar. Mark was sitting in the front row clapping for his mother. Sam and Toby were sitting next to him, coloring quietly in the bulletins. Ready, Ms. Bennett? Detective Reynolds asked quietly. Yes. I pushed the heavy oak doors fully open. They hit the back wall with a dull thud. The sound wasn't loud enough to stop the applause immediately, but the ushers standing at the back turned around. Their smiles faltered. I started walking down the center aisle. Reynolds and Vance walked half a step behind me, their badges visibly clipped to their belts. The applause began to die out row by row, rolling forward like a dying wave as people turned to see what was happening. By the time I reached the middle of the sanctuary, the silence was absolute. The only sound was the click of my heels on the hardwood floor between the carpet runners. Pastor Miller stopped mid-sentence. He leaned into the microphone. Sarah. He said, his voice echoing loudly. Confusion instantly morphed into stern disapproval. Sarah, you know you are not supposed to be here. There is a court order. Eleanor froze on the top step. She turned around, and for a split second I saw raw, unadulterated panic flash across her face before she forced the mask of the terrified, grieving mother back into place. Pastor, please! Eleanor cried out, her voice trembling perfectly. She took a step back, pressing her hand over her pearls. The children are here. She's violating the judge's order. Mark stood up quickly, puffing out his chest. Sarah, I'm calling the police. You need to leave right now. I stopped at the front of the aisle 10 feet from the altar. I didn't look at Pastor Miller. I didn't look at the 400 people staring at me. I looked directly at Eleanor. They're already here, Mark, I said. Detective Reynolds stepped past me. He didn't raise his voice, but the sharp, authoritative bark of a seasoned cop cut through the cavernous room effortlessly. Mark Bennett, Eleanor Bennett, Reynolds said. Step away from the children and keep your hands where I can see them. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Aunt Carol, sitting 3 rows back, covered her mouth with both hands. Officer, there is a misunderstanding, Pastor Miller said, hurrying down from the podium. This woman is unwell. The family has a temporary restraining order against her. A civil family court order does not supersede a federal felony indictment, sir, Reynolds replied flatly. Please step back. Mark's face lost every drop of color. He looked from Reynolds to the other detective who was already moving to flank the altar. Felony, Mark choked out. His bravado vanished instantly, replaced by the trembling posture of a cornered animal. What are you talking about? I walked up to the edge of the front pew. I looked down at my two little boys. Their eyes were wide, but they didn't look scared of me. They just looked confused. Hi, babies, I said softly. Mommy is going to take you to get ice cream in just a minute, okay? Stay right there. I turned my attention back to my husband. 14 days ago. Mark. I said, my voice projecting clearly into the silent room. You and your mother forged my signature on a home equity line of credit. You stole $150,000 out of my house. And then you wired $42,000 of it to lease a luxury apartment at Uptown Metro for your 24-year-old girlfriend, Ashley. The silence in the church shattered. Whispers exploded across the pews. Girlfriend forgery stole Mark stumbled backward, his knees hitting the wooden pew. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It's a lie! Eleanor shrieked. It wasn't the refined, tearful cry of a church lady anymore. It was shrill. It was desperate. She's making it up. She's a drunk. She's hallucinating. We have the forensic affidavit from the document examiner, Mrs. Bennett, Detective Vance said, stepping up the stairs toward her. And we have the bank wire transfers. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. We also have Mrs. Gable's Ring camera footage from Monday night, Eleanor. The video of you pulling up to my driveway at 11:30 p.m., taking a bag of empty vodka bottles out of your trunk and planting them in my recycling bin to fake the CPS report. Mrs. Gable, sitting in the 7th row, nodded grimly. The color drained from Eleanor's face. The polite Christian veneer she had spent 30 years cultivating dissolved into ash in a matter of seconds. The entire congregation, the people she baked for, the people she judged, the people she ruled over, were staring at her like she was a monster. Detective Vance pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink echoed loudly. Eleanor Bennett. Vance said, his voice hard. You are under arrest for felony forgery, federal wire fraud, and filing a false report to Child Protective Services. Put your hands behind your back. As Vance reached for her, Eleanor completely snapped. Don't touch me, she screamed, slapping at the detective's hands. She spun around, her eyes wild, and pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at her own son. It was him. It was his idea. Mom! Mark yelled, his voice cracking in pure terror. I didn't want to. Mark screamed back, stepping away from her and holding his hands up toward Detective Reynolds. Tears were streaming down his face. The golden child was finally burning. I didn't want to. Mom set up the HELOC. She said she practiced the signature. She told me how to transfer the money. I just signed my name. He threw his own mother to the wolves, without a second of hesitation. Eleanor let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a guttural roar of fury. She lunged at Mark, her hands curled into claws right in front of the altar. You ungrateful little coward! She shrieked, her face twisted in ugly red rage. I did everything for you. I lied for you. I tried to get rid of this bitch for you. Detective Vance grabbed Eleanor by the shoulders, spun her around, and slammed her roughly against the clear acrylic podium. The microphone whined with a sharp burst of feedback. Vance wrenched her arms behind her back. Click, click. The handcuffs locked. Mark dropped to his knees in front of Detective Reynolds, sobbing openly, begging for a deal, begging for them not to take him. Reynolds simply hauled him to his feet and cuffed him too. The Women of Benevolence winner and her beloved son, both in steel bracelets, standing in front of a horrified congregation. Eleanor was breathing heavily, her hair out of place, her pearls twisted crookedly around her neck. She looked at me. There was no fake sweetness left. Only pure, venomous hatred. You ruined my family, she spat. I stepped up onto the first stair of the altar. I looked at the woman who had tried to erase me, who had tried to rip my children from my arms under the guise of holy righteousness. You used the church to steal my children, Eleanor. I said, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper that carried perfectly through the dead silent room. Let's see if God covers federal wire fraud. I turned my back on her. I didn't stay to watch the detectives march them down the center aisle. I didn't care about the gasps, the frantic whispers, or Pastor Miller standing frozen in shock. I walked over to the front pew, knelt down, and opened my arms. Sam and Toby practically jumped into them. I buried my face in their little shoulders, breathing in the scent of their shampoo. The nightmare was over. The trash was taking itself out. The judicial system is usually a heavy, sluggish machine. It takes months to process a standard divorce, and sometimes years to settle a property dispute. But when a judge realizes they have been actively manipulated into facilitating a federal crime, the machine moves with terrifying speed. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday morning, I sat in the Mecklenburg County Family Courthouse. I didn't need to say a single word. An assistant district attorney presented the arrest records and the federal indictment to the same judge who had rubber-stamped Mark's emergency custody order on Friday. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and zero tolerance for perjury, was visibly furious. She vacated the ex parte order immediately. The stroke of her pen officially restored my full legal and physical custody. By 9 a.m., the Department of Social Services formally closed my file, effectively wiping the anonymous complaint from my record. I walked out of the courthouse holding the certified paper that gave me my children back. The air outside smelled like rain and hot asphalt, and for the first time in weeks, my lungs expanded fully. While I was walking out of a courtroom, my husband and my mother-in-law were walking into one. Because they were charged with federal wire fraud and felony forgery, their arraignment wasn't handled in a standard local court. They appeared before a federal magistrate in Orange County issued jumpsuits. There were no pearls for Eleanor. There was no tailored suit for Mark to hide behind. The prosecutor asked for a high bail, citing the severity of the fraud and the malicious use of the state child welfare system as an aggravating factor. The magistrate agreed. Bail was set at $250,000 each. In the past, Eleanor would have simply taken out a second mortgage on her house to cover the bond. But her assets were suddenly frozen under federal investigation. As for Mark, his only supposed asset was the remaining HELOC money sitting in his LLC account. By noon, the bank had locked that account down tight. Mark used his one phone call from the holding center to call Ashley, the 24-year-old he had leased the luxury apartment for. He was hoping she could somehow scrape together 10% for a bail bondsman, or at least hire him a decent lawyer. He didn't get through. According to Detective Reynolds, who gave me a brief update later that afternoon, Ashley had panicked the moment the bank froze the outgoing rent payments. She realized the money funding her new upscale lifestyle was stolen from a wife. She broke the lease, packed her belongings, and blocked Mark's number on every platform. Mark was left sitting in a cinderblock cell with absolutely nothing. No company, no mistress, and no mother to shield him from the consequences of his own cowardice. The social fallout was just as absolute. Grace Fellowship Church acted with the ruthless efficiency of an institution trying to protect its own brand. By Monday evening, Pastor Miller had sent a mass email to the entire congregation. He expressed deep sorrow for the deception that had occurred within our walls and announced that Eleanor Bennett's Women of Benevolence Award had been formally rescinded. Eleanor's social empire, a kingdom built over 3 decades of baked goods, judgmental whispers, and manufactured piety evaporated overnight. The women who used to sit on her patio and drink iced tea now spoke of her in hushed, scandalized tones, actively scrubbing her from their social media pages. Then came the apologies. My phone buzzed as I was sitting in the motel room packing the last of my clothes into my suitcase. It was a text from Aunt Carol. "Sarah, we are so devastated. Mark lied to all of us. Eleanor lied to us. We had no idea about the money or the forgery. Please forgive us. The boys need their family right now. I stared at the screen. I remembered the text she had sent me on Friday praying for my soul and telling me to get help. I remembered her sitting in my living room during the fake intervention, nodding along as Eleanor pulled empty vodka bottles out of a grocery bag. They hadn't questioned the lies because the lies were convenient. Believing I was crazy was easier than admitting the matriarch of their family was a monster. Now that the monster was in handcuffs, they wanted to play the victims. I didn't type out a long, angry paragraph. I didn't tell her she was a hypocrite. I deleted the text thread. Then I opened her contact profile, scrolled to the bottom, and hit block caller. I did the same for Cousin Bethany. I did the same for every single relative who had chosen the comfort of Eleanor's lies over the reality of my labor. The boys need their family right now. She was wrong. The boys needed peace. And peace requires boundaries. I zipped my suitcase shut. At 4 p.m., I pulled my Honda into my own driveway. The autumn leaves were beginning to scatter across the lawn. The house looked exactly the same as it had on Tuesday when they ambushed me, but the energy around it had shifted. It was no longer a territory occupied by the enemy. A white commercial van was parked by the curb. The logo on the side read, Carolina Precision Locksmiths. A man in a blue work shirt was standing by my front door, a heavy drill in his hands and a toolbox at his feet. I walked up the concrete path, the wheels of my suitcase clicking steadily behind me. "Afternoon, ma'am," the locksmith said, stepping back from the door. "You the homeowner?" "I am," I said, holding up my driver's license and the freshly stamped court order, proving my sole right to the property. He glanced at the paperwork, nodded once, and raised his drill to the brass deadbolt Mark had installed 3 years ago. "You want standard rekeying?" the locksmith asked over the whine of the drill. "Or do you want the heavy-duty strike plates installed?" I looked at the door. I thought about the secrets that had lived inside this house and the people who had tried to steal it from the inside out. "Heavy-duty," I said. "Nobody gets in without my permission ever again." There is a distinct kind of therapy in heavy-duty contractor bags. They are thick black and completely opaque. When you put something inside them and pull the yellow drawstring tight, that item ceases to exist in your world. I bought 3 boxes of them on Tuesday morning. I started in the master bedroom. I took every tailored suit, every golf polo, and every pair of expensive leather shoes Mark had bought while I was paying the electric bill, and I shoved them into the bags. I moved to the garage next. The unopened server racks from his failed logistics startup. The boxes of promotional flyers he had printed but never mailed. The golf clubs. All of it went into the bags. Finally, I went to the guest room. Eleanor had a habit of leaving emergency items at our house: a spare cardigan, a customized Bible, a pair of floral slippers. She claimed it was for convenience, but it was really just a way of marking her territory. I threw those in too. It took me 4 hours to clear out 5 years of dead weight. When I was done, I dragged 12 heavy black bags to the end of the driveway and lined them up neatly along the curb. Tomorrow was bulk trash pickup day. I stood on the porch, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and watched a stray leaf blow past the pile. The house behind me felt different. It didn't feel hollow. It felt expansive. It felt like mine. My phone rang. I pulled it out of my back pocket. The caller ID simply read Mecklenburg County Detention Center. A collect call. Mark didn't have a lawyer yet, and he certainly didn't have bail money, so he was using his rec time to dial the only lifeline he had ever known. I swiped the green button and accepted the charges. Sarah. Mark's voice was frantic, breathless, and stripped of every ounce of entitlement he had carried just 3 days ago. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you picked up." I didn't say anything. I just listened to him unravel. "Shh. Sarah, you have to help me," he begged, the panic vibrating through the phone. "It's terrible in here. Mom is in the medical wing because her blood pressure spiked and she won't even speak to me. Ashley won't answer my calls. I have nothing. I know I messed up. I know I did. But I'm still your husband. I'm still the father of those boys. He was waiting for the reflex. He was waiting for the woman who had always stepped in to fix his mistakes, pay his debts, and smooth over his failures. You were, I said. My voice was calm, completely devoid of anger or pity. Now you're just a federal inmate. Sarah, please don't do this. Give me one more chance. I pressed the red button. Click. I opened the carrier settings on my phone and permanently blocked incoming calls from the county jail. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. 3 months later, the transition from autumn to winter was nearly complete. The air in Charlotte had turned crisp and sharp. The bank had fully investigated the HELOC fraud, reversed the charges against my property title, and formally shifted the liability to Mark. My house was officially mine again, free and clear of his theft. The divorce papers were currently making their way through the system uncontested because Mark was too busy fighting a federal prosecutor to fight me. Eleanor's trial date was set for the spring. Her house was up for sale to cover her mounting legal fees. Her church friends crossed the street when they saw her coming out of the lawyer's office. I didn't attend their preliminary hearings. I didn't need to stand over the wreckage to know that the storm had passed. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on my back porch wrapped in a thick knit blanket. A cup of chamomile tea steamed in my hands. Out in the yard, Sam and Toby were running in circles, chasing a brightly colored soccer ball through the frost-tipped grass. Their laughter rang out clear and unburdened. There was no tension hovering over the dinner table anymore. There were no hushed, passive-aggressive whispers in the kitchen. There was just us. Sometimes people tell you that family is supposed to stick together through everything. They tell you to keep the peace, to forgive the unforgivable, and to hide the ugly truths behind closed doors. But I learned the hard way that silence isn't loyalty. It's complicity. Sometimes protecting your peace means letting the whole world see exactly who the monsters are. I took a slow sip of my tea, leaned back in my chair, and watched my sons play in the sun. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? A lot of people in my extended family still say I was too cruel for sending my 65-year-old mother-in-law to federal prison. They say family matters should be handled internally and that grace is a virtue. But I believe grace is for mistakes, not calculated betrayal. Do you think I went too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of people who finally stopped taking the hit and started fighting back. Until next time, protect your peace.